and welcome to the Talks on Mental Health series. The series are brought to you by Mental Health Awareness Initiative. And my name is Gabor Garibian. I'm a co-founder of Mental Health Awareness Initiative, and I'll be your host for this event. And joining me for this 2024 session is Lindsey Hagopian, who will be talking about the role of yoga in healing trauma and managing emotional well-being. And it's great to have you with us, Lindsey. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Very excited. Very excited.
Me
This
too.
is this is our first time we are hosting you, and I'm actually very excited for this session. As you see, in today's conflict-torn and uncertain world, the conversations about trauma are of utmost importance. And I find it rather meaningful to have this conversation with you no other time but today, when people globally and Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, are faced with humanitarian crisis. Before I move to our housekeeping items and also to our actual talk, I want to talk about one of MHI projects. Since Nagorno-Karabakh humanitarian crisis, we at Mental Health Awareness Initiative have begun a mental health psychosocial support program to forcibly displaced people and have organized crowdfunding to increase our reach. Today is the last day of the special offer from our partners when they partially match your donations at Global Giving portal. And I would appreciate enormously if you could support us by donating and sharing this information with like-minded people, as every donation, no matter the size, matters and has the power to change the lives. Now, I would like to give a bit of a background on your presenter. So Lindsey Hagopian is 500 HR RYT trained trauma-informed yoga practitioner. She loves helping individuals to achieve optimal health and well-being. Lindsey's Armenian heritage and community engagement inspired her to introduce trauma-informed yoga practices to heal her fellow Armenians. With healing poses, gentle breathing, and mindfulness, participants release unconscious patterns that have been passed down through generations and adopt self-helping, if I'm not, no, self-nurturing practices. So now to our housekeeping items. So the first thing to know is that you can submit questions during our live stream, which we will cover during our Q&A session. Feel free to comment on the Facebook's page, DM us, or on the live stream below. And without further ado, I'm passing the floor to you, Lindsey.
Thank you.
So the floor is yours, obviously, but I would like to kickstart our conversation by asking you somewhat a chunky question. So the first part of that question is actually something we received from our followers, and that is what 500HR RYT stands for. And the second part of the question is what is trauma-informed yoga and how it is different from other forms of yoga?
Sure. So the 500-hour RYT, I don't know if the same if that is a US based credential or if it transfers into other countries, but the first yoga credential is a 200-hour, which you get after your first certification. And it's the number of hours that are required to complete your yoga training. And that is made up of anatomy, philosophy, energetics, breath work, all the things. And then you can do an additional training on top of that, which is another 300 hours to get to the 500 hours. So there's a 200 and a 500-hour credential. So I have the 500-hour. And then on top of that, I've done the trauma-informed 100 hours and trauma-informed yoga training specifically to work with individuals who are processing on a different level. So That's the
That's
credential.
impressive.
Yeah, it's just the yoga credential that we recognize here.
Hey, good to know.
So, um, but yeah, so I think so before we get into what is trauma-informed yoga, I just want to just level set because you and I talked about this where there is this misconception of what yoga is, and especially in the United States, and I know you've recognized it in other countries as well, that, there's this image of it being for, able-bodied, thin, young, flexible people who can do all the crazy tricks. But it really isn't about that. So yoga, as in a holistic sense, is all about bringing the mind back into balance. So it recognizes that it's a 5,000-year-old practice that came out of India with the goal of achieving self-realization. And so there's a set of texts that we reference called the sutras. And I always, when people ask me what I think yoga is, I always go by the second sutra, which is yoga is the taming of the fluctuations of the mind. So our mind gets clouded as we go through life, as we have experiences. When you have anxiety, it takes on different, you become absorbed with your thoughts. And so there's this idea that we have a true constant self that exists within each and every one of us. And yoga is the process of coming back to that. So if you are acting against your values, your body is going to feel that. You're going to start to get anxious. You're going to react to that. And so yoga is really the process of coming back to that. And we do that with the body, the breath, and the mind, different mental practices. So I do think in its original form, yoga is meant to heal in a sense, like help us sit with our trauma and process it. But there's this additional layer that's started to come out in the past 20 to 30 years where that pairs the clinical psychology aspect of it and really get into how can we really work with victims of complex trauma and help them process that physical experience. And so, there are different forms of yoga. You'll see if you look at a schedule, you have your vinyasa flow class, which is the main one that you see pretty much everywhere. It's very physical. You have restorative, you have you have different forms of yoga, and I think any of those can become trauma informed, but there are some elements that we incorporate into a trauma informed class that are, it's like very, the language is different. There are certain words that we stay away from. We never say the word surrender. We never say like, go harder into a pose. It's just very, very, very conscious of the type of language we use. There's a lot of choice. There's a lot of choice in that being mindful that certain poses may feel more vulnerable for some people and giving them options to be in one and another, while also cultivating a similar like physical like stretch or energetic experience. Certain, in a lot of yoga classes, we use props to help us in the poses, like yoga blocks, yoga blankets, yoga straps. There are no straps in a trauma-informed class either. No hands-on touch. And the yoga teacher is usually staying on the yoga mat and not walking around the room. So there are a lot of things that make a formal trauma-informed class trauma-informed. I do think that all yoga should be trauma-informed, but it isn't, unfortunately. So, yes.
Okay. Wow, that's really interesting. And I can see already some similarities between what we call trauma-informed care, like trauma-informed psychological, psychosocial, psychotherapeutic
Mhm.
care. Um, well, since we are talking about trauma-informed yoga. That's the topic of our conversation today. I'm wondering if we make it a bit social. So I'm wondering how trauma-informed yoga can be specifically beneficial for communities like Armenian community that are impacted by traumatic experiences.
Mhm. So let me just talk a little bit about like the nervous system. And I know you know of the nervous system as well. So we all have one. The nervous system, we have our different stages. We have our rest and digest, which is when we're operating from a place of calm, clarity. We can be relaxed and engaged at the same time. And then there's fight, flight, our fight or flight, which is, if a bear's running after you, you're going to take off. Your adrenaline kicks in. It's a survival response. And we need that. We do need that. So the survival response of fight or flight. And then there's also other states as well, where you get beyond that if you're in the fight or flight for a long time and you're not coming back to that regulated state. You get into a mode called freeze, fawn, where you just kind of shut down.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that shutdown state. And I think with trauma-informed yoga as well, we are trying to assess where the individual is in that nervous system, what nervous system state they're in, and get them back into another one. So that may mean getting them back into fight or flight for a little bit and then getting them into more of the regulated state. And there are different ways that we do that. But I think for Armenians, if we take a look at the last 100 years, 100 plus years, we have always been running for our lives, since the genocide. And then even after the genocide, on a global scale, in the diaspora, we have communities where people landed in countries where they still had to flee even a generation later. And that sense of safety has been ripped from underneath us, and that's been happening for generations and generations. And I don't think it's fully been dealt with. Mental health has been taboo everywhere, but I think especially in our community as well. And we have developed coping mechanisms, but I don't think we've physically processed that experience as a collective. If you think about some of the behaviors, when we were on the intergenerational, I was on a panel, or I moderated a discussion on intergenerational trauma, some of the coping mechanisms we've developed as a community, food, this obsession with food, and just constantly doing, and not really being. And I also think in society nowadays, we are part of a go, go, go culture. So we are consistently operating in this fight or flight mode. And I think in 2020, people did get burned out from activism.
Yes.
And then we also have, people in Armenia who are dealing with it firsthand, PTSD firsthand. There's a lot of different complex trauma in the community. And there's some physical processing that needs to be done. I do think that there is this subconscious fear that we all have, and you may not even be aware of it until you're triggered. So I have a couple examples of like when I personally felt triggered. I don't know if we want to get into that all right now, but I was even I saw an email from a yoga studio owner a few weeks ago, and it triggered me. As an Armenian, she wrote some content that I didn't really like. I responded, and it was just kind of like fluffed under the rug. And I had taught at that studio before, and I I don't go back there. I actually had my own private yoga session with an Armenian teacher scheduled later that week, and we talked a lot about it. And he had encountered a similar thing in his community. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to happen when you are least aware of it. And even with a practice, it may still come up, but at least, if you do have a practice around it, you can cultivate that self-awareness.
Yeah, I guess if I'm getting you correctly, having some type of practice is better than none, because
Yes.
even though trauma and what is called historical generational trauma is rather complex, uh, by simply ignoring, we're not going to get to the point of healing. But
Right.
even small practices can lead to long-term and everlasting changes, both on
Yeah.
personal, I guess, and on societal levels.
There's a book that I'm reading right now on specifically racial and ethnic trauma and restorative yoga for ethnic and race-based trauma. It's by a woman named Dr. Gail Parker. She's Black, and she talks about her process and research that she's used for healing racial and ethnic trauma. And it's even different than PTSD. I mean, there is definitely PTSD in our community, but on a global scale, it's something that's ongoing. And it's not fully researched yet, but there's denial, there's gaslighting. And so it is a whole other layer of trauma healing. So I think I think it's very important for us as a community to create our own healing spaces as well, where we can acknowledge it for each other, acknowledge that it's happening, and then we can start to process. So, she talks about being excluded from different conversations. I don't think Armenians are excluded from, larger scale conversations, at least in the US, but I think when it comes to our own experience, it is not acknowledged.
Right. So, when, so if I'm getting you correctly, well, one thing is practicing, right? Is that what you're saying? Like practice is better than no practice. Uh, what are some other ways of, because unfortunately, I'm not well educated about yoga and how impactful it is, though I used to practice myself. And when we're talking in the context of trauma, I'm wondering, would you say there is a difference whether somebody practices individually, but addressing the generational trauma aspect, meaning triggers, versus somebody doing the same thing, but within the communal setting?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Do you think there's a difference between practicing individual versus in the communal setting?
Right, especially for in relation to trauma-informed yoga. Would you say there is a layer of efficacy, one being more, let's say, productive, even though productive is not the best word to describe?
No,
Uh,
I understand what you're saying. I haven't thought about it that way. I do think that that can be based on the individual. Um, and I think a combination of both, honestly. I do think it's important to have your own daily practice, and I like to frame it as, maybe it's 15 minutes in the morning where you are doing some sort of breath work. maybe you're doing some journaling, maybe you're doing a little movement. I do like to meditate off, but when I'm talking in a trauma-informed sense, sometimes meditation isn't accessible. So we need to use different ways in. And I like to use the breath as a starting point, or just a little bit of like dynamic flowing movement that links the breath with the movement. But your 15 minutes in the morning can be a combination of a few different things, the breath, a little bit of movement, and then maybe some journaling, or maybe just taking a short walk of some sort. A walking meditation could even be some like a way that you start your practice, and paying attention, not having headphones in, but paying attention to just your feet on the ground and taking that step, bringing your mind into balance with your body, noticing if any anxiety comes up, feeling it, and then noticing it as it passes through. But those are all different practices that you can do on your own to process. And then I do think that like community is important. We have this concept of a sangha in yoga, which is your community, where you can go and not feel alone, this connectedness of a group. So I think a combination of the two. I do think that, and at least my own, well, I've actually heard it from, particularly in 2020, I was teaching some online classes, and there was a girl who joined my online, like an Armenian girl who joined my online class, and she was in the midst of her 300-hour training in October 2020, and she said she dropped out because she didn't feel like the group was really acknowledging her pain. And so I think that, and I saw a lot of different specific community yoga things pop up, and I just didn't always feel included. So I think that having our own space is really important to have.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for this quite insightful explanation. So since we are talking about trauma-informed yoga, and many of people watching like globally, but specifically in Armenia, uh, has some level of experience, let's say, with managing uncertainty. I'm wondering if there are certain techniques that some of our followers can use on their own to facilitate emotional well-being.
Yeah. So let's just touch upon like a mental technique first. So when you're in your day-to-day cultivating awareness, I would say, and noticing, just taking a step back, noticing, what are some ways that, like, if you are triggered and you notice that after the fact, can you go back and think about, like, I'm trying to describe awareness, but cultivate an awareness of how you are reacting in the moment. And that comes with practice. Early on, it is a little bit hard to access, but over time, you'll start to notice that. And then once you notice when that happens, then you can start to accept it and move on and heal. In terms of, and I think we're going to get into a couple of little practices. I like to start by just cultivating body awareness too. When we're anxious, our mind gets very disconnected from the body. It starts to cycle into all the different things. You have what's going on in your life today. You have your complex trauma that might be happening in the background. And so our minds get very disconnected from our bodies, and we need to bring that back into balance. So a body scan meditation is always great, but I always like to start my sessions with an orienting practice. And I'll lead you guys in one, and then some breath work. So, and we can play around with some breathwork techniques. It's kind of funny because I can't see anyone
Well,
on here,
because most of the people
but
watching online, but
are
I'll do my
live.
best to be
But
a good student.
but yeah,
I
so
promise.
we'll do an orienting practice. I'll do a short body scan, an abbreviated one, and we can get into some breath work. I'll do a couple more calming ones, and then a higher energy one. The higher energy one, you know, if you find that you are in a little bit more of an anxious state, maybe just stay with the calming breath work and then save that for another day. But if you're feeling a little bit more in the sluggish, tired, and I can talk a little bit about that too, tired, sluggish state, then that one would be good for you. So the way that I'll usually like assess where someone's at in it's going back to some of that yoga philosophy in the sutras. We have these qualities that we take on energy wise. So we have what's called tamasic and rajasic energy. We have both of them in us. The rajasic energy, when it's out of balance, when we're out of balance, we become very anxious, scatterbrained, jittery, all of those feelings. And then the tamasic energy, when it's out of balance, it's when we're feeling like that sluggish, depressed, lazy state. So the equivalent of that freeze, fawn mode. And so we need to bring that back into balance with some more energizing postures, breath work, things like that. So I'll give you a little bit of the balance there. So, all right. So you can take a comfortable seat wherever you are. And
Okay.
you can lay down for this. This is for everyone else. You can lay down for this. Another element of trauma-informed yoga, if you're not feeling comfortable, you don't have to close your eyes. You can just have a soft gaze and leave them open. But as you are there, see if you can get comfortable, make some contact with the ground beneath you. And root down through your feet, your sit bones, wherever you are. If you're on the floor, sit bones. If you're in a chair, root down through your feet. If you're on the ground, just connect with the ground beneath you. And your hands can be wherever you want, either on your lap, wherever they feel comfortable, face up or face down. And try and get a sense of where you are in the room. Maybe you open your eyes for a moment and just take a look around. Notice where your eyes land. And then you can always keep them open, or maybe you start to close your eyes and just get a sense of the space that you are in. Bringing your awareness into the present moment. Letting go of what you were doing before. And not worrying about what you have to do later. And do a scan of the body from the crown of your head all the way down through your feet. So bring your awareness to the top of your head and then placing your awareness on your shoulders, your upper arms, your forearms, your back, your hips, your upper legs, your lower legs, and your feet. And just start to rest your awareness on your breath. Noticing the inhales coming in through the nose and the exhales moving out through your nose. Get a sense of where your breath is going in your body. Is it staying in your chest? Is it getting into the belly? So your inhale longer than your exhale. And then bring your awareness to your mind. Notice any thoughts passing through. And notice if you are reacting to any of those thoughts physically. And see if you can just allow them to pass through, almost like you're watching them pass through like they're a movie. And try not to get attached to any of them. Notice if your breath has started to get faster when you bring your awareness to your thoughts. Notice any sensations in the body reacting to any thoughts. And let's just slow down the breath. As you inhale, take 4 counts of breath. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4. Just take 2 more rounds like that. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4. Take 1 or 2 more rounds just on your own. And when you're ready, you can just return the breath. You can start to flutter the eyes open if they're closed. And so that's just, that was a little longer than what I normally do in a class, but that's like a practice to get you into your body and to check in on the different layers. And then we can also get into some of the breath work as well. So starting with, so we did some of the 4 count breath. We're going to do a little bit more with that. We'll do 3-part breath, and then we'll do breath of fire. And that one I can talk a little bit about afterwards. But to start with the 4 count breath, it's the box breath. You may have heard about it before, you may have not, but the 4 count breath, you'll count to 4 on the inhale, hold for 4. And then on the exhale, you'll count for 4, and then you'll hold at the bottom of the exhale for 4 counts as well. So let's do a few rounds of that. So again, you can keep your eyes open or closed, but when you're ready, just come back to your grounded position. Maybe you adjust yourself from where you were before, or you can go back to the same position. There's no right or wrong. But when you're ready, you can close your eyes or find your soft gaze. And when you're ready, you can take a deep breath in. Just take 1 round of normal breath. Inhale, let everything out. And then inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. So notice, like, did that 4 count feel good for all of you? If that was too much, you can always shorten it to 2, cut it in half, or even just go down 1 to 3. So the box breath, just equal ratio, whatever works for you. Some people like to add more time. The 4 isn't enough. So try whatever works. So we'll do a few rounds and I'll coach you through it. So you can come back to that, breathing in, taking a nice deep breath in and a breath out. And then inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Continue on your own. Just take 2 or 3 more rounds. And then when you are ready, you can let go. Just return the breath back to its regular state. Good.
This one is my personal favorite, if I can
Is
say.
it? All right, so we'll do another calming one that I like, and this is the 3-part breath. So we'll start. So a lot of us keep our breath stays in our upper body, and that's just trials of the times. We're doing so much. So it stays in our chest, but we want to also be mindful of getting the breath into the belly. And when we are focusing the breath in our chest, it's harder on the heart. Belly breathing can slow down the heart rate. So we're going to work on that for a little bit, and then we'll get into another one. So you can come back to that comfortable seat. I actually do like to do this one laying down. If you are in a place where you can lay down, then definitely take it. Neither of us.
I have host responsibility.
Exactly. But so you can even you can place a hand on your heart and a hand on your belly. I like to do that so that you can actually physically feel the breath filling your torso. So the first, you're going to break the inhale into thirds. So the first third, you're going to breathe into the belly. The second third, you'll breathe into the lower part of the rib cage. And then the last third, you'll just breathe into the upper part of the rib cage, any other space that can take breath, and then slowly let it out. And then inhale into the belly. Inhale into the low part of the rib cage. Inhale into the upper part of the rib cage. And slowly breathe out. Inhale a third. Inhale a third. Inhale a third. Slowly breathe out. And take a few more rounds of that on your own, breathing in, breathing in, breathing in, and slowly breathe out. And continue for a few more rounds. And then when you're ready, when you finish that next round, just release the technique and open your eyes. Feels good?
Yeah. Was somewhat difficult, I'll be honest.
Oh, really?
The last one, because it feels
So,
like you run out of space, in
yeah,
your body.
yeah,
There's
no,
no
I
more
know.
space.
But I think over time, like you start to develop more capacity. That's actually my favorite one. Like when I am feeling anxious and jittery, I'll lay down, I'll do that, and I can literally just like feel my body start to relax. And yeah, so we'll do an energizing technique. If anyone's like pregnant or has like a heart problem, I don't want to scare you, but this is the more energizing one, and it can be very activating, but also effective if you are just feeling super exhausted. I like to say like an afternoon slump of some sort. But sometimes people like to have a mudra where they take up space. I think that that's good for building confidence. But I'm just gonna have my hands here. But it's like the exhale is very emphasized. There's a pumping of the belly. The inhale is very short. So I'm gonna try to.
So you push out your belly, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
as you exhale, your belly snaps back and you're on it's a very passive inhale. If it's a little hard, we can also do something a little bit different, but that's the opposite extreme of what we were just doing.
Mhm.
So I like to use it as a counter, but it's so are you doing it or no?
I'm not sure I'll be able to do that, to
Okay,
be
that's
honest.
okay. Let's just do another one. Let's do what's called the stair step breath, and this is still a similar energizing effect, but you will almost it's like short little inhales in and then a breath out. So
Okay, I see. How many inhales?
I just did 6, but yeah, so we'll do 5. So sniff, 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 and then slowly breathe out. But it's a different energizing, it's a different um it's a different effect than what we were just doing. So essentially the inhale, when we extend the inhale, that energizes, and then when we extend the exhale, that is more calming. So you can manipulate the breath to get different techniques. I think normally, like in our normal day-to-days, like most people, our breathing patterns have become very emphasizing on the inhale. Like we have a longer inhale, we're breathing out. Our exhale is very short. And so that kind of keeps us in that fight, flight,
Right.
anxious state. And so just if you're ever feeling anxious, what you can do is just be mindful of where your breath is. Take a moment, check in with where your breath is. Notice if the inhales are longer than the exhales, and then you can slowly start to extend that exhale to tap into the relaxation. But
I
I mostly
see.
I mostly teach the calming breathing practices anyway. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Here we are. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for your insightful presentation. I think I personally enjoyed it, and I think many, many of our followers really enjoyed it. And I hope that all of you watching gonna take this technique with you home. So, for those of you who are connected, please send your questions through, and we're going to try to answer them. So our Q&A session from this point is officially open, and I'm gonna start with one question that I am rather curious. So, in your experience, what is the most important factor to be mindful of when practicing trauma-informed yoga?
What is the most important? I mean, I actually think I think it's, I'm trying to think of what the most important factor is. I think that if you are showing up for a trauma-informed class, then the teacher should take the lead for you, where it's a lot of if someone has a lot of complex trauma and they're showing up to class sometimes. I mean, for some people, just getting there is a big deal. Um, and I don't want them to have to like think about anything. Um, but I do think if you are showing up for a trauma-informed class, there aren't a lot of them around that are publicly like trauma-informed. Um, getting a sense of like the instructor's background and no,
Yeah.
no, I think, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'm gonna go through some of the questions. So we have comments and we have some DMs. First question is, some of our followers asking, how long does it take to see a positive change through yoga?
Yeah, so that I think is unique to everyone. I do think there are studies that have shown 8 weeks of meditation can show changes in the brain. There are studies that in a form of yoga called Kundalini yoga, that after 12 weeks, people have noticed changes in mood. I do think that that is something that is to the individual.
Mhm.
But I think like when someone, I think people can start to feel a shift maybe in the 8 week range, but it depends on where someone's at, to be
I see.
honest. Um, I don't want to put a time frame on it. I think that there are people who once they tap into their body, once they learn breath work, they're like, oh my God, I don't know how I lived without having these techniques. But I also don't think it's also not a quick fix either. It is like always an evolutionary process. Like I'm still learning things too, but I think
Right.
what yoga and breath work and meditation and just overall the practice does is it allows you to sit with the uncomfortable feelings without them derailing your life, if that makes
I see.
sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, I do think that there's no quick fix to anything in this world. So,
No,
and
no.
yeah,
But I mean, yeah, I do think like I and people have different preferences, different instructors have different preferences. I don't bring crystals into my practice. And there are people that love crystals. But I consider that to be, seeking an external fix for
mhm,
something. But where, we have in yoga, we recognize that like we have the tools inside of us to deal with everything that happens to us in life. And, it's not always an easy process, but
mhm, yeah.
it's helpful.
So I'm a bit mindful of time. Yours for like an hours, but mostly yours to be honest. So I'm gonna just handpick randomly some of the questions because there are a lot we got
Yeah,
to answer now, and then the rest. Well, what we can do, we can actually perhaps maybe even post on the event page, and then you can answer those questions whenever you have time.
yeah,
So,
sure.
one question is yoga effective for PTSD?
There are definitely studies that show it's effective for PTSD. I don't have the exact stats at hand. If anyone has read the work of Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, he's run a number of studies on yoga for PTSD. And actually, my teacher that I did trauma-informed training with worked under him and ran some of those studies. So it can be incredibly effective.
Right, thank you. Another question is when people are struggling with daily survival needs, what and how can these techniques help? What examples do you have?
Daily survival needs. Can you give an example?
Well, I'm not the one asking the question, so I'm not
Oh,
sure. But let's take it theoretically. I guess it might be perhaps, I don't know, but like financial needs,
right.
work-life balance,
Mhm.
and for some people who are, living in a places where are like, which are conflict torn apart.
Mhm.
This is like making sure that, you live till the next day.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are situations like this. So what and how can these techniques help, and what examples perhaps you can come
I-
up with?
so I am gonna start with like the body and I don't know if I would necessarily call it the body, but there's getting a sense of some sort of constant instability that you have that you can identify. And whether that's in it's easier in some on some days than others, whether that's identifying a little piece of something you're grateful for that you have, um, but also identifying some like tangible physical or like a something that is constant, and whether that when I say that, it can be a couple different things. So at our root, at our foundation, we have this source of stability. We have our foundation, our core, our root chakra. I don't always like to use all the yoga terms, but the chakra, which is our source of stability, security, foundation. So I always like to go there first. What can you identify that is a constant? And that can be the ground beneath you for now, in this moment, in this physical moment, that ground beneath you. Um, and taking stock of other different factors that you might have, like a relationship, like do you have a family member nearby? Do you have like, so usually when you're home, your relationships, your job, when those things that can throw off your sense of stability, right? But like, how can you just find one small thing, no matter how small it is, even if it's the ground beneath you right now, um, to have some sort of tactile, solid thing that you can hold on to, or just connect to. So that's kind of where I start, no matter where it is. I think it's a lot harder for some than others right now, and to find that. And I do want to acknowledge that, but no matter where you are, how small it is, trying to just find that little source of stability. And
Right.
then in however you talk to yourself, is it, this is temporary for now. What do I have right now? And just using that as your constant.
Wow. Thank you. Wow.
I hope
Thank
that
you so
I hope that's
much.
helpful. That yeah, I've used that. That's been I think it's easy to lose it is easy to lose sight of things, like even me today, like, and then I have to just remind myself, like I have everything I need right now. And in other parts of the world it's not that easy. But
Right.
it's a challenging process for people, but if you're in transition, what is a constant that you can find for right now? And just acknowledging that you have something right now, but no matter, without ignoring that it's difficult.
Well, thank you. We are wasting time, and I would like to give you like a couple of minutes to basically say whatever you want.
What do I want to say? No, if anyone ever wants to ask questions or schedule some time, I'm open. You can find me on Instagram, DMing me or email or my website, and happy to always chat further with anyone who's interested in learning more.
Thank you. And for those of you who are still connected, this session recording will be available soon on our website, mha.ram, together with other recordings. And before we finish, once again, I would kindly ask you to donate and to help us to do more. And we will see you next time. Thank you.